Once upon a time, in a bright and peaceful kingdom, there lived a kind princess named Snow White. She was beautiful, gentle, and loved by everyone in the castle. She lived happily with her husband, Prince Huntsman, in their golden castle on the hill. They ruled the kingdom with kindness and joy, and the people were always happy. One morning, as the sun shined through the castle windows, a dwarf named Ace ran into the hall. "Princess, Prince Huntsman," he called, "I have something very important to tell you." Snow White smiled and said, "Of course, my friend, what is it?" Ace took a deep breath and said, "When we returned from the mine to the castle, we heard a strange voice." He continued, "The voice was crying for help. We followed the sound down a dark corridor. We went down some stairs and found a dungeon we had never seen before. Inside the dungeon, they saw a man lying on the ground, weak and tired." Snow White asked, "Who was he?" Ace said, "I think he is the huntsman who once saved your life, Princess." Snow White was shocked. She remembered the man who had saved her from the evil queen. Hela must have imprisoned him before she turned into stone, she said. Without hesitation, Snow White and Prince Huntsman rushed to the dungeon to free him. They unlocked the door and helped the huntsman stand up. The huntsman looked at them with tears in his eyes and said, "Thank you for saving my life, Snow White. I have been down here for so long that I almost lost hope," he said. Snow White smiled kindly. "You are safe now, my friend." Meanwhile, far away in a dark corner of the forest, a stone statue stood silently. It was the evil-hearted Queen Hela, still trapped in her stone curse. Her loyal servant, Dunkov, was nearby, living in a dirty old tent made of sticks and cloth. He was searching through an old magic book, trying to find a spell to free his queen. "Invisibility spell, no frog spell, useless," he grumbled. "Ah, here it is, the freedom spell." Dunkov took a long tree branch and used it as a magic wand. He waved it in the air and said, "Abracadabra, from stone to human, from human to queen." The stone statue of Hela began to shake and glow with strange light. Slowly, the stone started to crack, and something crawled out. But it was not the beautiful Queen Hela. It was a giant slimy snail. The snail turned its sticky head toward Dunkov and slid close to him. "Oh no, what have I done?" Dunkov screamed, running into his tent. He flipped through the magic book again. "Maybe this spell will fix it." He pointed the branch at the snail and shouted, "Magic reverse, turn back to the queen." There was a flash of green light. The snail began to change shape again. But this time, Hela turned into a huge frog with golden eyes and a loud croak. Dunkov's eyes grew wide. "A frog? That's worse than a snail." The frog jumped toward him, and he screamed, "I'm out of here." He hid inside the tent, mumbling to himself with the magic stick still in his hand. "None of these spells work. Curse those block-headed dwarfs." He accidentally said the magic words, "Rocco Blocco," while waving the branch. At that very moment, back in the castle garden, the 7 dwarfs turned to stone. Snow White was talking to Prince Huntsman when she heard a loud sound. She ran outside and saw her friends frozen in place like garden statues. "Oh no, my dear dwarfs," she cried, "what has happened to you?" They stood silent, their faces full of fear. their bodies hard as stone. Snow White knelt down and touched one of them. "Please say something," Prince Huntsman said. "This must be dark magic. We must find the cause." Snow White ran to the room where the evil queen's magic mirror was kept. She stood before it and said, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, what happened to my friends?" The mirror shimmered and spoke with a deep, mysterious voice. "Your dwarfs are under a spell, cast by Dunkov from far away. He tried to free his queen from her stone curse, but his magic went wrong." Snow White asked, "How can we break this spell and save them?" The mirror answered, "You must find the missing page from the Book of Magic. The page is hidden somewhere in the forest, waiting to be found." Snow White nodded and thanked the mirror for its wisdom. She went to the throne room where the huntsman was resting. "My friend," she said, "the dwarfs are under a spell. I need your help." The huntsman stood straight and replied, "I will gladly help you, my princess. It is my honor to save your friends and your kingdom." He took his bow, his arrows, and a small bag of food, then left the castle. Snow White watched him from the window and whispered, "May the light guide you." Meanwhile, Dunkov discovered that a page was missing from his magic book. He scratched his head and said, "Maybe that page has the right spell." He decided to look for it in the forest too, without knowing where to start. "Under this rock, no, inside this hole, nothing," he complained. He did not know that the missing page was floating on a branch of a colorful wish tree. At that same time, the huntsman entered the forest, following the trail of magic light. He walked carefully, listening to the wind and the whispers of the trees. The forest was quiet, except for the sound of birds and the rustling leaves. The huntsman followed the glowing light until he saw something shining in the distance. It was the magical page, hanging from the branch of a beautiful wish tree. The tree had leaves of many colors, and the page moved gently in the wind. As the huntsman stepped closer, he heard someone else walking through the bushes. Dunkov came out from behind the trees, his eyes fixed on the same page. "Hey, that page belongs to me," Dunkov shouted. The huntsman replied calmly, "That page will save the dwarfs. Step aside." They both looked at the tree, realizing they were the same distance away. Without a word, they started running as fast as they could toward the page. Dunkov ran with short, stuffy steps, his cloak flapping behind him. The huntsman was faster, but Dunkov was determined to win. "Out of my way, big man," Dunkov cried, pushing through the branches. The huntsman pulled out his bow and aimed carefully at the page. He released his arrow, and it flew through the air with a sharp whistle. The arrow cut the wind and passed right over Dunkov's head. Dunkov looked up and yelled, "Hey, watch it, you wild archer!" The arrow hit the page perfectly, pulling it from the tree and back to the huntsman. Dunkov stumbled over some rocks and fell flat on his face. He groaned, "Ow, those dwarfs will pay for this too." The huntsman picked up the magical page and held it safely in his hand. He turned back toward the castle, walking quickly through the forest path. Dunkov sat under the tree, defeated, and muttered, "Not again." By the time the sun began to set, the huntsman had reached the castle gates. Snow White saw him coming and ran to meet him with joy. "Did you find it?" she asked, her eyes filled with hope. The huntsman smiled and handed her the page. "Yes, my princess, here it is." Snow White held the page carefully and thanked him from the bottom of her heart. She rushed to the room where the 7 dwarfs stood like statues. She unrolled the page and read the magic words aloud. "O look of garden gnomes, one and all, I speak this spell to break the curse." A soft light glowed around the stone dwarfs, and the air filled with sparkles. The first dwarf, Ace, began to move his hands and open his eyes. What happened?" he asked, rubbing his head. "Next, silly, shy, angry, jolly, curious, and lazy all started to come back to life." "Thank you, my princess," they said together, their voices full of joy. Snow White smiled and said, "You are all safe now, my dear friends." The huntsman stood beside her and bowed his head. "It was an honor to help you, princess," he said humbly. The dwarfs cheered and clapped their hands in celebration. "Yeah," said Jolly, "we're back. Time for a feast." They all laughed, and the castle was filled with happiness once again. Outside, the wind blew softly through the trees, as if the forest was smiling too. Snow White looked out the window and said, "Peace has returned to our kingdom." The huntsman smiled and replied, "And evil has been defeated, thanks to your heart." That night, the castle was bright with lights, music, and laughter. The dwarfs danced around the table, singing old songs from the mine. Snow White and Prince Antoine joined them, happy and grateful. They knew that love, courage, and friendship had saved them once again. When the celebration was over, Snow White stood on the balcony and looked at the stars. The night sky was clear and bright, just like her heart. She smiled and whispered, "May our kingdom always live in peace." The huntsman came beside her and said, "You have a pure heart, princess." Snow White looked at him and replied, "Courage and kindness will always win." He nodded, knowing her words were true. The dwarfs watched from the courtyard, laughing and singing under the moonlight. They knew that evil was gone, and the forest was safe again. The next morning, the sun rose over the hills, filling the land with golden light. Birds sang sweetly, and the flowers bloomed everywhere. Snow White walked through the garden and smiled at every creature she met. The animals bowed to her, as if they knew she had saved them all. She gently touched a white rose and said, "Love is stronger than magic." The huntsman smiled and answered, "And kindness is stronger than fear." The dwarfs cheered, "Long live Snow White, long live our friends." There was joy in every heart, and music in every room. The castle bells rang, and the kingdom celebrated a new beginning. And from that day on, no evil magic ever touched their land again. The moral of the story is simple: be kind, be brave, and never give up hope. For kindness can break any curse, and love can heal any heart. And so, the story of Snow White and the Huntsman ends with light, peace, and love.